Okay, I want to talk about a little bit today is about the stuff I use to build my harness for my John Deere tractor. So let's go through the stuff that you'll need. One of them is soldering gun and resin coated solder, and ideally some solder paste, because I soldered all my wires together, and when I did all my crimp connections, I soldered the end of the crimp connections as well, just for a little security that they wouldn't pull out. Another thing you'll need is a bundle of zip ties, because I zip tied everything. I'm not sure how many zip ties, probably 20 or 30 zip ties I used. Heat shrink for sealing up your solder joints and anything you need. I connected wires together to lengthen things, and I put in some crimp connectors, and then I soldered over them, or solder heat taped over them. So a bunch of that stuff. Heat gun to shrink that. You can use a Bic or a little butane torch, but that tends to burn things. If you use a heat gun, it's a much cleaner process, and a little safer. It takes a little longer, but still ends up with the same thing. I think you have more control. Another thing you'll need is some wire. So what I got here is 16 gauge black and white, so I know what I'm doing. Because LED lights are polarity sensitive, so better be aware of that. Some tape for taping a harness together. I built my crossover harness between my backup lights with this wire, and then I just taped it all together, the length of it that I needed. And then once I was done with that, then I put some wire loom on it, just as added protection to it. So I wire loom. So I did the wire loom all the way across wherever there was open or bare wires or taped wires. Part of this loom crossed over that. This is a smaller gauge, 18 gauge wire. You'll notice that on LED lights, you have a very thin, small wire, which I believe is 18 gauge. So if you need to extend any of that, you can do that. Most of my wiring harness was built with the 16 gauge, which is a little bigger. You can use 14 gauge, but that's pretty heavy. Another thing you're going to need is some fishing wire. I use this wire to fish my harnesses down the center of the lower part of my ROPS. My ROPS didn't have any openings on the upper section, so my wiring is all zip tied to the ROPS externally, and then when I get to the part where the ROPS bends, then I fished it inside. You need a good pair of wire strippers, wire crimpers, a voltmeter to tell you polarity of your wiring and whether or not your wiring is actually doing what you expect it to. So in my case, I added on to the work-light wiring harness at the back of my tractor, because there was some bullet connectors back there that were actually functioning off the light switch. So I wanted to jump in off of that. One thing was to get some power, and the other was to utilize the switch part of that to switch my lights on and off. So it was power for the switching part of my harness. And I grabbed my power off my power lead coming to my starter on the tractor. So I needed just a crimp-on connector that would go over that, about a 5/16 size bolt. So this is kind of the common connector that I used to grab onto that. And then if you're going on a John Deere tractor, be aware that their bullet connectors are oversized. So a your typical bullet connector you will get from your Napa store or your local auto parts store, the size of it is going to be 0.157, and that's too small for a John Deere tractor wiring harness. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to keep everything wiring harness wise on the tractor original, just in case I sold it and somebody else wanted to put an original work like kit on it or whatever, they could still do that. So what I ended up doing was ordering through my local agricultural auto parts dealer a .180 size set of bullet connectors, and I'll include all these the list and the part number from the bullet connectors that I got. My installation that I did on my tractor, the wiring harness was never tapped into. It was just added onto using the existing factory connections. So that was one of the things I wanted to achieve. I didn't want to be butchering my wiring harness at all. Nor did I want to be drilling in my dash and adding a button, on-off button. You'll see when I go through the tractor, I used a wiring harness that didn't have a drill-through on-off button. I just used a stick-on button. So which I would highly recommend that. If you don't want to be drilling through any of your tractor or RV or whatever, this is a pretty good solution. So with all this stuff here, my wiring harness kit cost me in the neighborhood of $20, and I got it. Where did I get that? I ordered it through Walmart. Yeah, it was on Walmart's. So we're in Canada, so it's like $20. If you're in the U.S., that same wiring harness kit, if you go through Walmart.com, that wiring harness kit, the one that I used with the stick-on push button, is $7. So pretty darn cheap. Anyways, if you wanted to build this all on your own without using a pre-made wiring harness kit, it's quite possible to do it. All you need is a button, weatherproof button. Whether you choose to go through your dash with a add-on button or not, just an on-off switch of some sort. The stick-on buttons are available. I found them on AliExpress, pretty cheap, $6 or something like that. Then you would need a 30 or 40 amp automotive relay, and you would need a spot to put in a fusible links between the whole system. So I'll show you that as I go through where all that kind of stuff is. So anyways, this was all the parts that I used to install my LED harness, except for the I used 2-inch and 3.5-inch U-bolts to do mine, and I'll show you that as well. So anyways, on to the next part, would be doing the visual part of my installation. Okay, here's my setup on my John Deere, I think it's a 2305 tractor. So that's the backup lights, LED backup lights that I have there. And then we'll come around to the front. 22-inch light bar. So how did I do this? So what I did is I have the relay in where the other factory relay is. And currently right now it's zip tied to the side of that. And then this is a 20 amp fuse that comes along with the harness. So that's zip tied in there. And on this side, you'll notice, get my finger in there, this is the heavy gauge side. So this is the one that's powering the light bar. And that's where we get the power from to run the relay. So what I did is I jumped in off the big cable that comes off the battery for the starter, and I grab power for the relay back there. And then what that does is it runs behind the starter and then jumps on right there. And then right here is the heavy gauge negative connection, but I just found a bolt. And there's another one of those crimp connectors that I used, these guys here. So I used two of those, one for the battery positive and one for the negative. So that powers the light bar harness. So then the harness then runs behind here. And remember that wire loom I was talking about? So I loomed the harness. So that runs there under the tractor, all the way to the back and comes back up here. This will be where it comes up. So it's all zip tied tight. About every 6 inches I put a zip tie on. So then what have I got for circuits? So this is 16 gauge coming back from the harness. This is the original harness. Black and white wire. You notice that there was a white and black wire coming off the relay. So that's the 16 gauge power. And then this circuit runs the light bar, and that goes up into the bottom of the ROPS. Comes up the ROPS, right there. Comes out. And then I connected it to a weatherproof connector, so if I ever needed to service a thing, I could actually pop that off. And then it goes into the 22-inch overhead light bar. And then if you come back down here, so there's a left and a right circuit for work lights that John Deere provides in their harness, and that's where that .180 bullet connector thing comes in. So right here is the left work light switch, and that's where I connected into the light switch part of the harness that operates the push button switch. And the reason why I did that is because it's a low voltage or low amperage circuit, and that's running off, actually the light switch on the dash operates that. So when the light switch on the dash is turned to overhead lights, that activates the power to my light switch, which activates the relay and turns the light bar circuit on. So this is where, right here, is where my bolt connectors, the .180 bullet connectors, hook up there to the stock John Deere wiring harness. So there's that. And then for the rear backup lights, oops, I have the right side work light circuit right here. So remember, left side, right side. So the backup light circuit runs off of that. So that is a standalone circuit that runs off the John Deere light switch, and it runs off the right side work light portion of the harness. And then that runs into the bottom of the ROPS. And then it follows that up through the middle and then comes out and again into a weatherproof connector. And then it runs that light, and then it crosses over with a wire loom. I built this harness to the other light, and then there we go, bulbs are up. So move back up, and I'll show you how I did the 2-inch light bar connection brackets here. So there's my 2-inch. It was a plated U-bolt 2-inch, and I'm a bit anal retentive, so what I did, I hate how those things rust over time, like pretty quickly. So what I did is I put some of my shrink wrap tubing on it, on the whole 2-inch plated U-bolt, and I shrink wrapped it on there. So now, even if it does rust, I won't see it, and it shouldn't affect my rollover bar at all. So there, and then here's the back side of the 3.5-inch. I used a stainless steel connector. Fortunately, I couldn't find a square connector. It was a round one. I think it was meant for doing something with a boat where this bracket would be underwater. So it's a stainless steel bracket. And then this bracket itself, I got that. It's actually off some fencing hardware pieces that I found at a PV Mart store in Saskatoon here. So it was powder coated, but the holes fit the 3.5-inch. So I just grabbed those as I possibly might need them, and as it turned out, I did. So it worked out really well. So here's 2-inch bracket and 3.5-inch stainless steel bracket and some powder coated brackets that I picked up for fencing, actually out of the fencing portion of that thing. So anyways, we'll run around and have a look at the front of this here. Okay, so there is my 3.5-inch bracket. So what made this cool is I went and got this 22-inch light bar before I knew the width between the ROPS. I was walking by and went, yeah, I really want that. So it was a 22-inch light bar kit that I picked up in Saskatoon. And when I got it here and I was trying to make the 2-inch U-bolt system work on it, it wouldn't. It just couldn't make it work. Primarily because I wanted to run it really high on the top of the rollover, and then that meant that the connection system was where the curved part of the ROPS was formed. So a 2-inch bracket wouldn't work. So I just grabbed my 3.5-inch. I bought it just on spec that I might need it, and man, that worked out really well. If you have an oversized bracket, you can pretty much make it work anywhere. It's so flexible. So you can actually take that thing and you can move it back and forth, and as long as you're within 3 inches of the width of your rollover, with the 3.5-inch, you can pretty much make any light bar fit. It's really flexible. So you notice this isn't at 90 degrees to the rollover bar. So there's so much flexibility in making it work. So I'm glad I picked it up. It was totally on spec, and man, it worked out really well. So anyways, 3.5-inch stainless steel. So back to this. This is the only bracket that I actually made. I used 3/4-inch flat stock that I had around, and drilled the 2-inch holes in it. Guessed at the extension that I needed. Drilled the 3rd hole. Cleaned it all up. Painted it with some black Rust-Oleum, and away it went. So there you go. So that is how I hooked it up. Now let's go to the push button light, which is down right here. So it's a stick-on light. It's just stuck on with 2-sided sticky tape on my rocks, and I ran the wire on the outside. Why I did that, I have no idea. I probably should have run it on the inside, but yeah, for now, we'll run it how it is. Eh? So the way this light works is when I turn on my light switch to on, and you look over here, and there's a green light that comes on, that means that that switch is energized, and the light isn't on. Now, if I press that switch, the red light comes on. That means that the switch is now working, and my overhead light is on. Now, if I left that switch in that position and I turned my light switch off, it turns off my overhead light. Now, if I turn the light back on, it turns my light back on. So you can, half the time, if you just set this switch to activate once, now I'm running all of my lights off that light switch, and there's no real load on it. The load is run by the relay and the wiring harness. So very little load on that light switch, because that was one of my concerns, that I would burn out my light switch. And that's why I went to the relay and the harness. So here we go. I'm now using my factory light switch to run my LED light system. And essentially, I never drilled a hole in my tractor at all, because I don't have a lot of dash space to do that, which is one of the reasons why I didn't. I wanted an external switch, and I also didn't want to mess with my wiring harness, and I didn't want to drill a hole anywhere. So, oh, I should turn the light on, and you can see the back of that. Those bracket plates come on. Those come on automatically without the switch on the rollover. So there they are. And when it gets dark, we'll try see how far this actually lights up. So, anyways, there's that part. Next part will be a nighttime shot of the lights in action. Okay, here's the normal lights on the tractor. Here's my issue. I've got snow in the bucket and I raised the bucket up. I can't see in front of me, not a chance. That bucket's up about a foot, maybe 18 inches. All that range. Okay, let's turn the light on. Lift the bucket up and block the lights on the tractor. Look at that. I can still see. Oh, wow. Kind of liking that. The lights are up really broad. So let's have a look at the backup lights. See where I'm backing up. I'll just jump off just to show you. There we go. Awesome.